I'm Jeremy Greer. I'm co-founder and co-executive director of Liberation in a Generation, a movement support organization building the power of people of color to totally transform our economy. Who controls it, how it works, and most importantly, for whom. I'm so excited to do this interview for this edition of The Forge, an online journal on organizing strategy and practice by and for organizers, which is being guest edited by my co-executive director, Solana Rice, and the co-directors of Black Visions, Candace Montgomery and Misky Noor. They're looking back at the uprisings from last summer and the longer movement to defund and abolish the police and the prison industrial complex. I'm here with D'Atra Jackson from BYP 100 and Mercedes Fulbright from the Texas Working Families Party and the Coalition in Defense of Black Lives Dallas. We're talking about how we center and support Black leadership in this moment. Mercedes, D'Atra, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us and sharing your perspective on this issue of The Forge. And I'm just going to dive right in. And if each of you could talk about how your work has shifted in the past year.
The needs of our people have increased, which means that the needs of our organizing has increased. So that includes our mutual aid work, that includes the way that we deal with harm in our communities and in our organization. And also that so much stuff has happened with the pandemic that we didn't think was possible. Oh, okay, it is possible to not give more money to the police. Oh, it is possible to give cash directly to people. Oh, it is possible to let people out of jail. All of the things that we've always known to be possible, and that time and time again, folks that make decisions around our lives have told us it's not possible, it's possible. So that has just shifted what we understand to be our own demands, and how can we get clear about what we are asking for.
Our work has shifted in the fact that when George Floyd was killed Memorial Day weekend, just 4 or 5 months before that, I was a part of a budget fight where the language we were using was reimagine public safety. And it was a group of concerned women and non-binary folks of color who were targeting our city council electeds to divest from policing. And we were making the case about the need for us to invest in, more transformative community safety efforts. And the few days after George Floyd was murdered, for us, everything around us shifted. Not only the language, but the organizing landscape, in which more people wanted to be a part of the organizing that we had already been doing in the city of Dallas for about 4 to 5 years. And so responding to the murder of George Floyd in a digital organizing capacity, and then shifting it in a moment of crisis when it came to the pandemic, for me was really jarring. We spent a lot of time online trying to bring people into our movement. And then there was this opportunity to take to the streets in a way that, one, we had to acknowledge that, many people were furious and upset about the fact that systems like policing continue to kill Black folks, right? Continue to kill Black men and women and trans folks. And our response to that was, we're going to risk our health and our lives with this invisible virus and actually say enough is enough. And we did that with 25 million people across the globe. And so for me, it really did shift how I showed up in organizing. I was so used to, self-selecting, finding the folks who knew what we were talking about, finding our people who were concerned about these issues, and then taking to the streets and finding so many strangers around me who actually believed in the same sort of liberatory future that we had been fighting for just a few months before then. And so it was really exciting. For me, it was a little jarring again, because I was just going from basically digital organizing, sheltering in place, and now we're out in the streets with thousands of people with masks, without masks, and we're taking on the state and we're taking on the police. And so, that is how my work shifted. And it didn't take over the past year. It really was just a few months of a difference. And so in that, I was super excited to be a part of the uprisings and also to take those demands that we had just a few months before and translate that into some structural changes that needed to happen.
Yeah, I want to dive into a piece of something you all were kind of talking about in your answers, and it's this relationship between movement and movement infrastructure. And like, the movement infrastructure has been built over time, right? It didn't just appear out of thin air this summer, right? Like the way maybe the media or others who aren't as connected to Black liberation movement understand it. And I want to know, as that infrastructure has evolved over time, what did we learn about that infrastructure? One, this summer during the uprising, but also during this time of COVID. Like, where is it strong? Where is it really, really robust, and we need to really continue to build it? And where is it kind of weak, and we really need to maybe reflect on what we're doing and if it's the right direction or if there's things we should try out.
Yeah, for me, I would say the strengths were one, seeing women, femmes, non-binary Black folks build this global multiracial feminist movement, and in turn, be able to block authoritarianism because of that. I think that's something to note. That was a strength, that was a win. And yes, that came through electoral wins, but it also came through shutting shit down, right? That local organizing was able to respond to the moment through these budget fights, but again, shutting businesses down, shutting shit down, and being able to create these tangible, concrete demands that so many people were invited to be a part of. And we saw that with 25 million people taken to the streets. I think, riding the visibility of the defund moment was huge. It was an opportunity to bring in new people and organizers and translate that into these local fights, right? I would say, as someone who is connected to the movement for Black Lives, like the strength that we had for many of Black folks, Black-led organizations in major cities, we were resourced with the financial support that we needed on the ground for things that we needed. There was capacity building support through the Freedom Summer series that M4BL allowed hundreds of Black folks to participate in through political education and capacity building. Coordination across cities. Dallas, we were able to be in conversation with organizers in Chicago, Minneapolis, New York, Jackson, Mississippi, to build out people's assemblies and these mass trainings and learn about the occupations of City Hall there in New York, right? So for us, that was the strength that I saw, that I experienced, and we got to really take hold of here locally in Dallas. And then I would say the weakness within our infrastructure, and I'll speak more broadly and not just about Dallas, movement-wise, like the right has so much money. They have capital, they have infrastructure, they have the power, right? And it's in the hands of the few. And what they do with money, I think as a movement, we fail to do with people. We have the people, we have the numbers. And yes, this summer's uprising allowed for a mass absorption period into our movement. But what does that look like after things have died down, right? How do we actually sustain that absorption period that translates into onboarding new organizers, right? And getting them to commit to this protracted struggle. And I found that hard locally when we were, one, creating this coalition, but also, on the left, we're really big about decentralized structures. And so for me, not having the proper infrastructure or structure in ways where, one, like some of us are very anti-hierarchy, it was really hard to figure out how to bring people in and keep them in, right? To help develop their leadership, develop their capacity to want to stick around beyond just the defund the police moment, but actually for the long fight that actually is ahead towards liberation, right? I'm also thinking about the weakness around just having elected officials as our targets, right? And not harnessing the power of the people and making it politically impossible for elected officials to oppose our demands, right? Like we lost in Dallas. We were able to defund about 7 million, but a few weeks later, they put that money back into the police. And I saw that in other major cities as well, right? And so for me, again, I think one of the weaknesses for the movement on the left, for sure, is our lack of ability to harness the number of people that we actually have on our side, working class people, poor people, young folks, and inviting them and encouraging them to commit to this protracted struggle, so that when we say, defund the police, also we're going to disrupt businesses, occupy streets, occupy your halls, whatever, to where it is politically impossible for you to ignore what it is that we deserve and what we want as a people. And I think that we have centuries of moments like that where, groups like SNCC, Black Panther, they have shown us that it's possible, but like, how do you do that in a way that's sustainable? And on the left, we haven't figured that out in a way that allows us to sustain that sort of mass movement and keeping people around and continuing that pressure.
Yeah, Didi, and I wonder if you could also dig into, like, as you answer the question, like, what is it BYP 100 is really honing in on? What are the things that you're doing to kind of grow and build that infrastructure as you talk about those strengths and weaknesses?
Yeah, I agree with both of the strengths that Mercedes laid out. Just the in BYP 100, we always talk about like moving through a Black queer feminist lens, and we see it happening in some of the ways where we do feel like the folks that are at the margins of our community, which is already at a margin, being centered. The stories and the strategies that are being crafted are being led by the Black people that are at the margins of the margins. We need more of it, but I saw more of it too. And I don't think we're done with fighting that fight of really making sure that working class people, poor folks, are part of the strategy and decisions that we make. And then with the defund, the visibility that Mercedes was speaking to, and I'm saying this as a person, I've helped to build the Durham Beyond Policing campaign, which is like a 5-year-old campaign here in Durham, where we're pushing we want to decrease the police budget by 30%. I haven't seen until this summer just such a large interest and creativity around what we mean when we say defund the police and what we mean when we say reinvest in our communities. That the creativity of what we're visioning is becoming more real, and being put into our campaign plans and into our overall strategy. And so we have a community safety and wellness task force here, and that was a proposal that we made as like a combating the proposal by the police department here to add 72 new cops. And we were like, instead of doing that, why don't you spend that money on this alternative where people in our community actually get to say what safety is and what safety means? Because we know we've only heard safety as control. And we know that there's more ways to actually be safe. And so we want to encourage those. But I think that the uprising, the defund movement, has pushed our small little campaign to being a real force in our city when it comes to how we think about safety and policing, and how do we build our community up to be permanently committed to safety that doesn't involve the police. I think one of the weaknesses that I'll add, and I agree with some of the things that Mercedes said, but also just, I think we need to have more statewide power, and we need to move more statewide strategies. I think that there's so many uncovered corners of this country of people that need to be in our movement. They just don't know where the doorbell is. They don't know where the porch is to sit on. They just don't know. And we need to make sure that our campaigns and our work and our reach is more than just the major cities where we already know people are, right? And I'll speak to, again, in Durham, like we're a very, very blue city. We don't even have Republicans run for office in our city compared to the rest of the state that is pretty much red Republican led. And like, again, with all of the progress that we've made in our Durham Beyond Policing campaign, that we have this statewide apparatus that is pushing forward an anti-defund bill, that is pushing for, if a municipality decides to decrease the police budget by more than 1%, they will not get access to statewide fundings. we don't have enough power in our movements across the state to actually organize to prevent that from happening, right? So with all of the work and all of that we've seen that has moved forward on the defund campaign, like we don't have enough statewide power to actually like fight against and to be in defense against that kind of apparatus and the speed of which they're able to move. They can move it through North Carolina. It's going to Texas next. It's going to Florida next. It's going to Michigan next. It's going to Wisconsin next. Like we actually we don't have enough incremental power to fight against it in a way that it needs to happen. I think for BYP 100 in terms of our infrastructure, I think the push that we're in right now is around the political development, right? Like I came into movement around the time of Trayvon Martin. That's a different type of political development that I was gaining at the time than folks that came into movement from the Vietnam War movement, or that folks that are coming into movement now with the murder of George Floyd and the uprisings that happened over the summer. And so, how do we take note of that as like information that we need in terms of how movements get developed in general, but also how do the individuals that are out there organizing Black people, organizing young people, trying to get people on our side of freedom in terms of abolition, like how are they also being politically developed? And so that's like really been what we're trying to push on, and it's challenging. It is difficult because now we're like the young people because we're 18 to 35, but that's really like two different generations of people now. And so it's a different things are at stake for people. And so what we understand to be our work and our movement and how we organize people are different. And we're trying to get clearer on that.
Oh wow, there's so many different places I want to go with you on. I don't know if I'm gonna have time, but I want to dig into the state-wide power that you just raised, Dee, because you're in North Carolina, Mercedes is in Texas, Florida, Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama,
South.
parts of
The
Michigan,
South,
like
Midwest,
or even like Michigan and Pennsylvania. Like there are Black people that are living in places like what you're talking about, and like I would. Like, what do you think we need to do to really galvanize the power of folks in those places so it's not just, Black folks in New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Detroit, the places that we think about, like Atlanta. What's it
Yeah.
going to take to do that? I'd love to go there with y'all.
It's multiple things. I mean, I think too is like in terms of the history of like statewide power in this country, especially when it's been led by rich white men, it's always been in the confines of like racism, segregation, like delegitimizing delegitimizing democracy. So I'm just like holding that part of our history and not trying to like replicate it. And I think that it needs to be multi-layered. Like we have to have a multi-layered, multi-strategy approach around the statewide work here in North Carolina. And I'm saying this as a person that was a statewide organizer in North Carolina. Like I was able to move throughout the state because we have a lot of HBCUs, we have a lot of NAACP chapters, there's a level of infrastructure, and there's more major cities. There's more major cities that have histories of Black resistance: Wilmington, Winston-Salem, Charlotte, Durham, Raleigh, like there's a lot of cities in our state that have long histories of Black resistance. And not to say that other states don't, but it is to say that infrastructure is really there, is set in the soil of the state. And we need to continue to like build multiple types of institutions that help to kind of harness that. And it could be working on, it doesn't have to just be around policing, right? It needs to be around education too. And our teachers, we in the bottom percentile around how much our teachers get paid, and just where our kids are in the classroom. So it needs to be, but all of these need to have a left approach. It can't just be moderate, and we can't just rely on the Democratic Party of our state to be the apparatus that helps to enforce all of those things. Like, no, we need to actually build multiple types of infrastructures to really organize and put pressure and have people in it. Have people really committed to it. So, I mean, it's an ongoing fight here because we have all kinds of preemption laws and immigration stuff and policing stuff, education. It's always something here, but we're also like really committed to growing our statewide power, and it can happen in the context of elections, and it needs to happen in all of like so many other ways.
Yeah, to expand on that, because I think that is the first piece, is like forging these cross movement organizing and solidarity opportunities. And for me, it's about framing and organizing around issues like healthcare, immigration, the environment, foreign policy, and framing them as racial and economic justice issues so that everyone has a seat at the table and understands that this fight is their fight too, right? Any way that you enter this conversation, this movement, this space, is through this lens of racial and economic justice. And so there should be an opportunity for us to be able to move the sort of demands and also contend for power from the state that approaches it with that sort of cross movement organizing. And that's why I named that it was so important last summer, and especially through the elections, that folks are able to build this racial feminist movement, right? Because the murder of George Floyd unlocked the consciousness of so many people across the world, in which people were like, oh, this is so much more than just police needing more effective training. Like, this is actually about a system that is rooted in anti-Blackness. And so if we're able to frame and make our demands and our onboarding process, or whatever that looks like, meeting people at the porch about those, racial and economic justice issues, I think it will invite more people to want to be a part of our movement. And the state power piece is so important because the right is so good about harnessing their power and modeling and shopping those things around to their allies, right? ALEC is so good about creating model legislation in a particular state and then shopping it around, knowing that there is Republican power and strength, right? And these leadership and these electoral leadership that allows them to easily pass these things like anti-protest bills, like in Florida, and what North Carolina is doing around punishing cities with defunding the police. Texas, our governor said that last summer. He was like, I will freeze property taxes. If these cities, which so interesting for my city, we're Black-led city, a majority of our folks that are elected are Black, that are in power. And he said, we will freeze your property, which will impact our schools, it will impact our streets, it will impact so many things that people actually need, the social services. And so it was a threat in a way that actually forced elected officials to shrink. And we didn't have a response to that because we were so focused on the local piece that we didn't have the opportunity to think about what it looks like for our governor to try to like chop us at the knees, right? And so I do think it's important that we continue to build out these cross-movement organizing opportunities and inviting more people of different backgrounds, of different walks of life to be a part of this fight, because it is literally going to take us harnessing the power of the people in order to beat back on the Republicans. They are few in numbers, and they know that. Is why they're pushing things like voter suppression. Is why they're pushing these things like these anti-protest bills, because they know if we have access to the things that we actually deserve and need, they won't be in power anymore. If we continue to contend for power in the way that we have been, not only in the streets, but through calling through City Hall and shutting businesses down, disrupting workforce, they know that they actually will lose their power. And in that, it is important that we're coming to the table and inviting people to be a part of this cross-movement opportunity to organize.
What do you think is needed to like nourish that type of infrastructure that we're talking about, where there's this like statewide power, which I believe actually the culmination of statewide power actually is what's necessary for national power, right? So it like multiplies in that way. So what do you think is needed to like nourish that type of infrastructure?
Yeah, I mean, I would start with trust building for sure, right? When we talk about inviting people from all walks of life, from different life experiences, it's going to require deep relationship building. alongside explicitly naming and confronting anti-Blackness and racism within our movement, right? Like, so much of these systems and structures are rooted on anti-Blackness. And you're going to see that in these cross-movement spaces. So I do think it's important, as you talk about the word nourish, like trust building, relationship building is super important in building the sort of power that our folks deserve and should have access to, especially understanding that like we're contending with a culture and power that has absolutely been unwelcoming to Black folks, to Indigenous folks, to Latinx folks. And so in that, we have to actually create the sort of containers and spaces that allow us to not only embody, but model the type of world we want to see. And so as I push and, you know, build this multiracial political party through Working Families Party, so much of my work has been like, we got to do the trust building piece. Also think about the investments in base building organizing and not seeing it as like, if there's a pie of money, only 5 to 10% should go to base build organizing. That actually should be majority of where I think our resources and investment should be. How do we build the capacity of more people to come into our movement? So that one, we're not experiencing like this few that are hoarding power within our movement and having access to resources and the leadership development that we deserve, but also an opportunity for more people to be in our movement so that we're able to circulate more capacity and skills. Things like burnout isn't so relevant on the left, you know? So for me, that's super important. And I think the other thing around nourishing our infrastructure, and Didi and I won't speak for you, but I think we can relate just over the last year. It's just like principle versus practices versus theory of change versus value, this discernment that's necessary and this commitment to be willing to disagree, right? And to be able to come to the table with differing opinions, but also to use our creative capacity and skill sets to try to get to some sort of solution around what it is we're fighting for and how we're getting there, right? Without like disposing of people and leaving them behind. Because again, what the left has is people, and we need to do what the right does with money with people. And in doing so, it is going to require us to understand that folks are going to come with different theories of change, in different ways of how we see ourselves getting there. But if we can like see Black liberation as our North Star, like the different approaches, Didi says this, the different approaches, the different tactics that we use should be able to be used in our movement because we actually need it. Because we don't have the capital, we don't have the infrastructure, we don't have the money. And we have to be honest about that. We have people. And we have people with a lot of lived experiences. We got a lot of people who are survivors and are resilient and are strong and are coming with so much that we actually need. And I think the uprising should be a great example of what it looks like when tons of people come together, when millions of people come together and demand not only something, but multiple things in a way that disrupts, you know, how systems actually can function. You know, like systems could not function last summer because we disrupted it for so long. To where they actually had to pay attention. It was impossible for them to oppose what we wanted because we all came together.
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, you said a lot, Mercedes, and I agree with a lot of it. I think Grace and James Lee Boggs talks about our reliance on spontaneity, and that like our reliance on spontaneity being a form of liberalism. And so just like speaking to what Mercedes was saying around the base building, like when I think about liberation and when I think about it existing, to me, it looks like permanently organized communities for the sake of a better well-being. And so I think our movements, and I'm saying this again as a person that came into movement in an uprising moment, our organizations and our strategies cannot rely on those spontaneous moments where there's people out in the streets, and that means that, oh, we're winning. Like, I just don't. I'm over that. I'm past that romantic idea around a revolution and around like what liberation looks like people being out in the streets just doing whatever.
And that's not a revolution. That's a rebellion. It's uprising.
That's a movie that somebody wrote, okay, and paid for, but it is not our reality. And I think that our strategies have to be for the long term. They have to be for the long haul, which means that they have to be deep. Like they have to be embedded in what we see as community and how we want to feel when we're in community, but also that the apparatuses that make decisions over our lives needs to go. Capitalism is what needs to go, and we just not going to solve that in one March or in one summer, right? And I mean, it's being called into question all the time, but we just need more calculation, and less rhetoric, basically, is what I'm saying.
Oh, you're saying
An
the
assessment.
song.
I need assessment too.
Yeah, it's a good segue into the next kind of set of topics I want to discuss with you all. In reflecting back to the summer, you know, one of the things we saw was kind of like public support from mainstream, I'd say white institutions, whether it was corporate America, whether it was philanthropy, whether it was the nonprofit sector, about like wanting to support Black leadership. You know, and which, you know, sounds good. It's something we've been asking for, right? Um, so for a moment, I want, you know, we've been very insular, focusing in on Black liberation movement. I wonder if we could talk out a little bit right now and really like define like what does actual support of Black leadership look like? Like what does that look like when you're supporting Black leaders?
Um, I mean, it's hard for me to not put myself in this, like to take myself out of this question, because I'm a person that's leading an organization and a national one and a Black one and super Black one and, you know, all the things. And I I think that the way that we've constructed our organizations in terms of the like traditional structure of the organizations is actually a setup for organizations that are interested in like leading movements. Um, I think the position that I'm in is a setup. It's a setup. I'm in it and I'm here and I'm gonna ride this thing out, but it's challenging in a way that only really comes up in these really heightened moments of spontaneity, of uprising, of economic disheveledness, and like just all of that. Like that is where the real accountability comes from. And Adrienne Marie Brown talks about this, like the high accountability and low support, of like Black leaders, Black women leaders, Black queer and trans leaders of our movements. And I think the support, like the support actually looks like not having these traditional structures of one person in charge and there's da 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 da. Like it just it doesn't work for organizations that are interested in leading movements. It requires a different level of accountability to the base. And in order to have an accountability to the base, you have to be able to have a relationship with the base. In order to do that, that means that all of the other shit that comes with being a Black leader, like that, it needs to be held somewhere else, or it needs to like not exist. Because if if I'm able to, like, I would consider myself a local organizer still here in Durham. And there's, I have to decide between being a local organizer and being a director. And I actually can't do both well. And I really want to be an organizer because that's who I am. But I think that the role and the leadership around, and the support for Black organizing is just not enough. And not in a sense that like, oh, I need y'all to make sure I have like access to fellowships and I can call on you for any old thing and whatever. Like that's not really what I'm talking about. What I mean is like just the level of self-doubt that you hold, because you're holding the weight of a movement and a movement organization on your shoulders. Like there's no amount of training or coaching that could take that feeling away from you. And I think just the added pressure of history and of being present for a historic moment, and every action and everything you do and every interview you do, every grant reports you're a part of, all of the ways that we are keeping track of and trying to archive what this moment is that we're in. And, you know, at the same time, you're trying to figure out how to support lots and lots and lots of other people, lots of other people. And so I think, like, yeah, I just think there needs to be more uh, like held collective responsibility of like, I am going to support Mercedes because I know that me supporting Mercedes means that her base is supported. That means that the people that she's training is supported. The people that she's bringing up in this movement work is supported. And I don't think, I think it becomes individualized of like, oh, because Dee Dee is in this role, I have to show up for her. But actually, you supporting me means that my staff gets supported. It means that my organizing work that I love here in Durham at home also gets an opportunity to be supported.
I was listening to Prentice Hemphill's podcast, Finding Our Way. They are a healing practitioner, somatics, and Adrienne Marie Brown was someone who they're interviewing. As Dee Dee spoke, I was thinking about something that Adrienne mentioned around this pandemic is really putting into focus the need to have capacity around care and who you care for, right? And this understanding and acknowledgement that you can't care for everyone. Like I may know 100 people in my life, but like as a human, I have the capacity to maybe intentionally care for about 15 to 20 people. And to Dee Dee's point, I think, you know, in an organization like BYP, it's important to note that Dee Dee can't be responsible for the 300 plus on record who are dues paying member, recognizing that, you know, we're in so many different cities and that the care of the folks that she needs to be focused on are folks that also can care on the people that are in their bases. So I appreciate you saying that, Dee Dee, because that came up for me. And I think it's important to acknowledge that and not have shame around the fact that like, yo, I can't care for everybody, right? I can love you and I will, but this collective care is the future mantra that we're trying to get to in our movement around abolition, and building alternatives also requires us to understand that there are how many billion peoples in the world, and collective care actually isn't going to be us being able to scale to that level of care. But for me, I've committed myself to a movement in which our structures should be able to be built to scale to take care of all of those people. That's why I'm committed to building a political party that wants to have a multiracial reflective democracy, right? In which when we talk about like a winter storm that happened here in Texas, right? The government actually is prepared and has the ability to take care of its people and not do it in this way where we're cutting out who we can care for and who we can't. And so to the question, how do we center and support Black leadership? I do believe it's about prioritizing our care. This world's not designed for Black people to thrive. So what are the ways that we're able to intentionally support Black folks? To me, that's through our leadership development. Dee Dee talks about this in the political, I would say political underdevelopment of our people. I think it's important that we are committed to the political consciousness and development of our people as Black folks, right? The visions and dreams that we have about our future should absolutely come from Black people. And it should come from a place of thriving and not just surviving. The things that we want about the world should come from a place of life affirming and not scraps and breadcrumbs that we've been used to, right? I would say opportunities to create and lead, right? BYP has been so great about harnessing the leadership of young people. And I think across movement, that should be people's intention. The youth, I mean, I came into this movement at 18. And I don't expect to be leading it still, you know, at 33, 35, but I definitely think it's important that we do invest in the leadership of Black youth and go even younger, to be honest, middle school, high school. And I do think it's important as we talk about prioritizing our care, investment in healing practices like mental health, somatics. I think Black people should be able to take sabbaticals. And I'm not talking about Black people in movement, I'm talking about Black people. Black people across the world should be able to take sabbaticals and step away and rest. And for that not to be, you know, considered a luxury, but actually a right, because we've suffered so much and we've had to move through this world as survivors. And I know the world that Dee Dee and I have committed to is a world where our lives are affirmed and that we do get to thrive. And we need more people to actually invest in that. And to me, it is about actually prioritizing our care in ways that allow us to take steps away from our work, our families in some ways, the relationships that we have with each other in ways that actually pours back into us so that we can continue to give back to the world in loving and caring ways.
Wow. Yeah. What you all just connected for me was so beautiful is this one around the reality that, as you said, Mercedes, the world is not designed for our care. And then Dee Dee, for you, what you said around like, so that means like the systems that we create will not look like or should not look like systems that were designed by architects of white supremacy. Like I just that connection between those two things, I think, is so profound that you all brought to this conversation. So one thing I want to shift to is kind of the content, because I think that some people are going to be listening. We talked about a lot about like within the movement, but there are a lot of people that are listening that aren't within the movement that we're operating in, and I do want to hone in on for those folks, like, what does a vision of safety for Black people look like that is replaced, that some system that replaces policing and imprisonment and kind of this carceral system that we're currently operating in? What does that look like?
Yeah, for me, I think about little Sadie's and the fact that she grew up without her mother because she was in and out of jail. And that my mother, from the court documents and statements that I've read, lived a childhood of abuse and trauma. And that translated into drug addiction and surviving many systems that failed her, and them never looking at her as someone that should be protected, given opportunities to restart her life, given the resources, right, to not have to survive and do some of the things that she had to do to take care of her family. And in that, for me, that is how I've been able to think about the sort of world of what safety looks like, because of all the many gaps and missed opportunities to take care of women like her, right? And children like me, right? Like I ended up in the foster care system because of the sort of system that, was set up in the 80s, 90s, and continues to exist for Black and brown kids. And so for me, that's living wages. Like when I think about my mother's story, I think about, coming up in Memphis, Tennessee, and what that looks like to be Black in the South, right? Divergent programs, mothers and fathers, siblings, caregivers who are experiencing addiction, alcoholism, all sorts of trauma responses, and they're not being programs like divergent programs. Emergency and safety responses that are decoupled from the law enforcement, right? I think about, the police showing up when I was like 9 months old, 1 year old, and it would be in response to domestic violence abuse happening within the home, and the police showing up. And that's how she ended up in jail, and I ended up in a foster care system. And actually needing the sort of emergency responses that didn't require someone with a gun that said, you know what, you're actually going to sit in a cage because you're a survivor of domestic abuse, right? Universal health care, including mental care, counseling, again, programs for folks who are addicted to drugs and alcohol. I think for many of us who have survived these systems, carceral and the welfare system, mental health care has to be at the forefront of the things that we demand in the sort of world that we want to be in. I think universal basic income is a part of a vision for safety. And as I think about this question, I'm also curious about what foreign policy looks like when we talk about replacing policing and imprisonment, like a world without borders, and what does actual foreign relationships across countries look like without war, without nuclear weapons, without a number of things that actually create world powers to have the power that they have, in ways that have kids showing up at the border here in South Texas without their parents, right? So for me, my vision of safety really is like, one, a lived experience, and also knowing that there's so many young adults like me who experience my story that I just mentioned, and the fact that there were so many gaps, there are so many missed opportunities to actually take care of people in ways that looks like the policy demands that we're demanding, but also the sort of investments that should come from our governments, and that being reflected in our society and actually prioritizing people's care, and not disposing of them because of, you know, the trauma responses to the violent institutions that we come from.
I think safety can only happen in being organized. And again, in my vision of liberation, it looks like permanently organized communities. And I think, and I mean like the small stuff too. I think about the like folks, how do we get our base, our communities, our people to know our neighbors as much as we know how to get a stop sign on our street, as much as we know if there's a pothole in the street, how to get it fixed, how to get it filled in and able to do it, as much as we know the history of the Black resistance in the place that we live in, as much as we know what our kids are being taught in school. Like I think about all of the different levels of understanding, education, information that Black people, poor working class people have been omitted from having access to, and how much the rich, the white, the affluent, like how much information they get access to, just off because people view them as being more concerned citizens. But actually, how can we build our communities to be permanently organized for the betterment of everybody's well-being? And I think about the future of these types of like pandemics and viruses. This probably won't be the last time that we are in a pandemic because we live in a capitalist system, right? And so it's we live in a capitalist system, so we don't have a medical system. We have a capitalist system, and that decides the process of which people are sick, live, die, all of that. And how can our communities be permanently organized to actually fight against that, and to build something new? How do we have enough care in our with our people? How do we have enough care with our neighbors? How do we have enough care for our history that we can survive, that we know we can survive any pandemic? And it's not a question. So I think about I'm naming things that are outside of the police for a reason, because I want to like manifest that future generations will look back on this moment and won't be able to imagine the types of interactions that we've had with the police, right? In the same way that we can't imagine something outside of a 40-hour work week. Like that, it was a different type of living that happened. And we want to build and keep pushing on defunding the police, but it's only because we want the future generations to not even believe that these are the types of engagement that we're having with the police. It just wouldn't even be understandable. And so that's my vision of safety in the future that I'm trying to craft with people like Mercedes.
Great, thank you all both for that. I have one last question. It's a question that's being asked across all of the interviews that we're doing for this issue of The Forge. What's being said but remains unheard?
I've been reading James and Grace Lee's Boggs' book, Revolution and Evolution in the 20th Century. And something that really stuck out to me, and that I'm like, oh, I got to commit to this in my practice and just showing up in movement. But they talk about that it's more valuable than those who would die for the revolution are those who would give the rest of their lives to it. And what I've seen over the last year is this romanticization around the martyrdom and death of our freedom fighters, with this expectation that we must do the same in order to achieve liberation. And I've really been pushing back on this notion, because I know that millions of people showed up in the streets because one, they were tired of seeing the death of Black people, but also they stayed in the streets because we were offering them a life-affirming demand, a life-affirming future. And I think it's important for organizers, especially new organizers that came up through the uprising, that movement isn't a claim to notoriety. It's not a trend. It's not for visibility, for retweets and likes on the internet, but it really is and should be a commitment to a protracted struggle towards liberation for the collective and not about the individual. And that part is really hard in a world, and I'll say just the last 31 years, just that has really emphasize the individual needs over the collective, right? And capitalism like fosters and encourages that. But when I think about them saying that it's more valuable that those give the rest of their lives to this movement, that it requires discipline and rigor, it requires a transformation of ourselves and the others around us, the political consciousness shift, that development that Dee Dee talked about. I'm learning more about this need for us to commit to a cultural revolution that doesn't leave people behind. When we say abolition, that also requires us to like kill the cop in our head, right? So that when cops don't exist, we're not recreating them, in this new world. That we also like contend for power as we're building alternatives. We can't just have alternatives that don't actually contend for power. And we also need to understand as capitalism and all these systems start to collapse that we assume this really awesome opportunity and responsibility to take on revolutionary leadership, right? And have this willingness to engage in principle, struggle, and debate. Like that for me has been really important over the last year. And lastly, and it's been my commitment through movement as an organizer, is committing to resilient practices that force me to embody the world in which I want to live in. I haven't felt it or seen it, but like I actually want to show up as the sort of kind of human being that does practice what it is I say that I want through my daily interactions with people around me. And I think that is more life affirming. I think that is more beautiful and actually honors like the miracle of life than to die for this revolution that we may not even see in our lifetime, to be honest. And we got to be more honest about that. We may not even see it in this lifetime, but our commitment to build this up for the next generation requires us to be here and to be present and to be committed to the transformation of ourselves and those around us.
I think we need better ways to engage with our own contradictions. And maybe this goes into the like cop in the head, the collective, our personal transformation, but like we need way better ways to engage with the contradictions. I think that our movements are full of very idealistic people. There's a vision, there's a future that we see, and we want to see it. We want to see it now. We want to see that we're not doing this for nothing, that we're doing this for the sake of the future and the visions that we have and the future that we deserve. And I think with that, just there's a real lack of baseline, how we talk to each other. Like, how do we disagree with each other and be okay with being in disagreement with each other, which requires people to get to know each other and deep trust and political trust and all of that. And like, before we even get there, like there has to, and we get to political trust by being in debates with each other, by being in disagreements with each other of like, oh, okay, cool. I hear you. I disagree, but we'll see, or let's try it out, or just like some ways of being of recognizing that we have to like love our people. We have to love each other. We have to love the people that is on our side, that's in the rooms, more than we hate our oppressors, more than we hate the state, more than we hate what we're going through. And I think that requires more practice for us to be in engagement and in debate around. And I'm saying this on here, but I'm saying it for myself too, of like, there is a fine line, and I'm from Philly, so my tone, the way I talk, my hands, the nails, all of it can be seen as very aggressive for some people. And, and so other things get pulled into question when you are in disagreement with someone that you don't have a relationship with. I understand that. And like, you can look at videos and see some of the political leaders of different times during the Black Power movement, during the Civil Rights movement, where they were in political disagreement with each other, where they were in debates with each other. We don't have that. I don't know of any. I can't send you one YouTube video that has a political debate between our political leaders. So I'm saying this to y'all, but I'm saying it for me too, of like, we just need more spaces, more opportunities to practice being in disagreement with each other and in our contradictions around what we're trying to do. Do we build deeper? Do we build wider? Do we stay local? Do we go national? Like, all of those things are debates. They're all debatable. There's no right answer. But we need the spaces to actually learn how to navigate them.
And that sort of practice honestly helps to build the conditions for the sort of revolution that we want to be prepared for.
Thank you for listening. For more conversations like this one, visit forgeorganizing.org. We'll see you on Twitter at forgeorganizing. For more information on Black Visions, visit blackvisionsmn.org or follow them on Twitter at blackvisionsmn. You can find more information on Liberation in a Generation at liberationinageneration.org or follow them on Twitter at liberationin. Thank you to Nino Fernandez for post-production audio and editing. And thanks to all of you for listening. Take care and stay safe, everyone.